Idea of what we've got for this particular webcast is to be able to take some time and understand what are the different types of things that are out there, at least as it's related to the digital health and quality of your projects, that you can leverage ImagineIt to help yourselves get incrementally or sometimes monumentally better in how you're going about things. As Lori mentioned, my name's Joe Eichenseer, typically coming to you from our Denver, Colorado office. I've been with the company for, about 24 years now. Prior to that, did a lot of schools and healthcare centers in my world of just building design and architecture before coming around. I guess that's a little bit about my particular background there. I've been BIM manager, IT manager, wore all sorts of hats before joining ImagineIt and wearing all sorts of hats here. Matt, maybe you for a little bit about yourself.
Sure. My name is Matt Miyamoto. I'm one of the team managers for our ISD professional services. So we manage all of the civil and AutoCAD-based services with IMAGINiT. I've been in the industry now for almost 25 years, part of the Autodesk reseller channel for about 15 years. Backgrounds in civil engineering. I was a civil designer myself before I joined the reseller channel, and now I'm part of the professional services here with IMAGINiT.
But y'all can see what we've got for our agenda here. We're going to specifically talk about types of things that happen when we're going through health checks and things that you can do if you wanted for Revit, Civil 3D, Autodesk Cloud, but trying to get some context behind it a little bit more. When we're talking about health checks, there's a little bit that we'll want to do of just making sure we're setting the right foundation of what is it? What are we truly talking about? Because the idea of a health check can take all sorts of different types of definitions depending on what it is you're looking at, what you're wanting to do. And certainly part of it comes from just stealing terminology, if you will, from medical side of things, of just saying, how are we doing? Let's just get a checkup. And it's not to say that we know anything is wrong. You could annual checkup that you might have just as your physical to keep things going, or periodic checkups just to see if any particular medications or prescriptions that you're on are still doing what they need to. The same type of thing here, except we're talking about the digital health of your files, whether it's a DWG file, an RVT file, you name it. Doesn't matter what we're talking about. It's just how well are we using that software, that system, and are you getting everything that you should out of it? Because if you're investing in this software, let's get everything you can out of it. Your investment's not going to change if you use it better. You'll just be more efficient, more productive, all those types of things. And the idea behind this, with ImagineIt's help, is that we're getting that impartial outside source to take a look at things. Or we don't have the same personal investment or politics games or whatever you want to call it that are sitting there that might be preventing messages. There have been times, I can't tell you how many times I've run through it, where I'll say something or give a recommendation or make a comment to something that I'm seeing in front of me that could be better, and it's the same thing that somebody else, whether it was a staff member or somebody in middle management or whatever, has said the same thing before, but the fact that we've got somebody outside the company saying it now, it has a different impact. And sometimes what we're also saying is, yeah, it's all good. You guys are doing as efficiently as you ought to for the technology that you're implementing. But either way, it gives you some of that validation of what's going on. Now, beyond some of those obvious things, as we're looking at the workflows that you're leveraging, the software that you're using, the idea of a health check comes through not only when we're running around and just seeing how did I do or how has something been performing, but it also comes through when we're talking about evaluating how past upgrades have gone, past implementations have performed. Did what you intended to do in that implementation of the software actually accomplish what you were looking to do? Are you looking to say, well, I think we need a different workflow? Well, let's evaluate what we have right now so that as you're moving into that new stage of whatever it might happen to be, you've got that stronger understanding of what is good that we ought to keep as we're moving into that new workflow. And then conversely, you know, maybe confirmation, maybe new information for what it was that you ought to let drift away as you're making your way into that new environment. So it's not purely, you know, the health of what we have done, but it can also be that health check for looking into the future as well. And as it says there in the green text, the big purpose behind it, as I mentioned before, and you'll hear it over and over again, is just maximizing that return of in the investment that you've already made in the software that you've got. And it really comes down to these types of things. We will typically go through and evaluate your projects, your files that are involved with the technology that you're using. You know, Revit, Civil 3D, AutoCAD, Plant 3D, Autodesk Construction Cloud, you name it. Just what are those things that we're evaluating and seeing where are the strengths and weaknesses? As I said before, benchmarking all those things against either past performance or setting a benchmark to be established to measure future improvements against. So we're looking both directions, into the past and into the future. And as we're doing this, getting that better understanding of we've got a general feel, hopefully, that the people that you work with roughly know the software that you're using to do your work. But how well do you know it? Well, you can get some level of analysis of how well do people know software through different types of skills assessments. IMAGINiT has a Productivity Now platform that we leverage from Eagle Point that has skills assessments built into it, and you can take this and just answer quizzes to be able to see, do you know what this function is? Do you know what that function does? If you don't, lead you straight into a learning path to help you learn more about the things you don't know as well as you thought you did. But there's a difference between knowing the software and actually doing it. That whole puts it into practice piece. So beyond just what we've got from a factual knowledge, what are you actually putting into application, applying to your projects? Because that's what's going to matter more. And we'll be able to identify, roughly speaking, we're not going to know, do people know about the layer command? Okay, that's a silly one, but still. We're not going to be evaluating, do they know what that feature of the software is, but we'll be able to have an idea of what people know about the software by what you've actually done in the projects, to know what's actually configured inside your templates, because that's what people are going to use, and that's what really matters more. The technical knowledge, yes, but the application of that knowledge is even more. So those are the things that we're getting into it, but even further into that why side of things of why do we want to do these health checks? Okay, yeah, we can benchmark, I can do all that, but it's really a lot of things that we're seeing here. Prevent performance issues with your documents. Again, Revit, DWG files, Autodesk Cloud files, building up caches, clearing caches, whatever it's got to be. We just want to be able to make sure that your systems are performing optimally. And it's a kind of a fuzzy way of stating things, but it's really true. We want to try and make sure that any limitations on your ability to get work done is not going to be hamstrung significantly by the software. It's performing as well as it can, as well as it should. There are times where, depending on what things you're running into, we want to do this so that we can help prevent crashes from happening, to help, provide safeguards against file save issues. Maybe a little bit less of a problem with, we'll say, CAD or DWG types of files, but there have been times where, depending on how you're working, Sync to Central with Revit might have issues. It's gotten better over the years with software and with IT technology, but it's not necessarily perfect all the time, so let's look into that. Exporting to other file formats. Make sure that whatever you send out in a different format is going to be what you want, is going to be printed correctly, exported correctly. upgrade correctly if you're going to future releases. So we're not carrying around as much baggage as we would if we were trying to bring forward some icky files. And then make sure that everything we're doing as best as possible is aligned with your overall company standards. Now, that's the big idea of what's happening from a health check in a larger context of broadly what is it, whether we're looking at software that's on your desktop, cloud software, business processes, you name it. If we're taking a deeper look into specifically Revit, and we're digging into that world, well, how does that look? Well, if we're doing a Revit health check, it really works its way into three major phases. Because if you're engaging with IMAGINiT, and hopefully you will, to perform this analysis, the first thing we'll do is take a look at the files that you provide us and just take an unfiltered view at what's there. As it says, a preliminary look at a project, and just get some general feel for how things are and where they're not. We'll see some different types of things that we'll be looking for in a moment, but we'll do that initial look, and without context, without any background information, just raw what's here. And some things might jump out at us as being weird. I mean, why do you have a whole bunch of in-place families? That's not right. But there may be situations where there's a perfectly reasonable explanation for why something atypical was done inside a project. So after we've had that first look at your project, we'll head in and start interviewing, having some conversations with the project team, people that actually did the work on it and have that extra context to understand why were decisions made. Well, we did that because one of our customers, they had a one-off like kiosk that they wanted to have for scanning badges, and they created it as an in-place family, and then somebody just copied it half a dozen times across this particular entry area. Now, would I have done it that way? Probably not, but at least does it give us some understanding as to why somebody did something? They just modeled in place and did whatever? Yeah. Now, it gives us a better understanding for how can we make any recommendations for a better way to do it. Okay. And there's any number of different things that might come through in the nature of that Revit project that will be valid justifications for odd occurrences. And there may be that's like, oh, wow, we had 1,500 warnings inside the file. I never knew. We need to have that information. So then we'll take that context and do the deeper dive, dig into things quite a bit deeper. Take a look at some of those families, not just looking at how big is the family when you export it out to disk, but what's going on inside the family. Were they made in some of the best ways? Do you have 2D plan graphics and 3D model graphics, or is it a 2D only family? Is it a 3D only family? But do that deeper dive into the project files to come back and identify, were people going through unnecessarily some bad behaviors? On a Revit side, some of the highlights of things that we'll look at, you're seeing right here. It is, as it says, by no means a comprehensive list. But these are the types of things that we'll be looking for. Most people know by now that Revit and CAD data, you don't want them to come together. But we also know that it's inevitable. We need to bring in a civil 3D background. We've got some sort of standard detail we want to bring in, or something from a non-Revit partner on the project. It has to happen, but was it linked? If it was linked in, was it linked in properly to current level only, if that's what it should have been versus any other settings? If it was imported, and you had to have it imported for whatever reason, was the file cleaned up properly before importing it? Things like that to try and understand, what are we looking for? You can use this as a partial list of just things to keep an eye on anyway as you're going through it all, but what are we doing in there? And some things that are not really Revit file oriented, no BIM execution plan to help guide how things are going along. You've got different pieces of software, different installs of Revit that are different service pack levels. It's not really in the Revit file, but those are some of the things that we'll get as part of the interviews. Now, as we're doing this, there are places where we've got some different pieces of software that we'll use internally to help extract some information that matters about Revit files. There's a piece of software, IMAGINiT Clarity, that will scan for a lot of these things on the fly on a whatever cadence you choose, once a week, once a day in your files, and start reporting this type of information to you so that you can start evaluating and knowing when things are going south before it ever goes that far. So different tools that we'll use to help speed up the process on our side. Some of those tools, like Clarity, are also available to you to get done right away. We'll take that stuff and we'll pull it back into a report. Now that report, we'll want to make sure it follows that typical KISS principle, and it's not the band. And I don't know if it's really the right way to say keep it simple, stupid anymore. So lately I've been calling it keep it simple and succinct. So it keeps the same, alliteration going on, but a little bit more acceptable language in a business environment, perhaps. But we'll get some things that look like this: red, green, yellow dots of how are we doing? Is there a place where we need to take some action right away and not? We want to make sure that whatever report results we give back to you are things that are actionable, and you can take it and run. And there might be things that you say, yeah, I get it, and IMAGINiT thinks this is not as good as it could be. We're gonna not agree with the level of severity that IMAGINiT might give us, but it's still out there and we know it's fixable. So if that's what we've got from a Revit standpoint, Matt, let me turn it over to you and talk about how we'll run through things from a Civil 3D standpoint.
Thanks, Joe. So from a very similar standpoint and perspective of how Joe was describing a Revit health check, on the Civil 3D side of things, we are also kind of focusing on that three main components that play a bigger part in the efficiency and effectiveness of how a company is working with their applications and their software. And again, when we think about the intent of a health check, we're focusing on a program that's already in use, something that you're currently working with projects on. Not necessarily, a project or a company that's trying to implement Civil 3D. That's not a company that would be ready to benefit from a health check. But if you are working with Civil 3D, you've been working on projects for a number of years and have it already in use, and you want to kind of find out how well it's been working, that is really the intent of the health check here. And he hit on a number of very, very good points in the overall descriptions of what a health check is and how it can benefit from you. But from a Civil 3D standpoint, we're also looking at, taking a look at realizing the benefits of the program itself. Are you really leveraging it for all that it can provide to you, or have you been kind of just using it to get the job done in a sense? And in order to do this, we try to focus on identifying current processes, current configurations, and then seeing how that measures up against what we found out through our own experiences and through best practices and industry standards to help identify areas that could promote efficiency or enhance productivity. Within that stage of the three components there, we're also trying to take a look at the current skill set of the end users that are working on your projects. So we do have a way of evaluating and measuring their proficiency within Civil 3D and Civil 3D tools and features and functions. We try to promote this as not a test. So we're not trying to test people on whether they know how to use the application. It's more of a measure of their understanding of what's available to them and how well they are using those tools. AutoCAD and Civil 3D are essentially built off of the same platform, but they are very, very different programs when we take a look at them. And in some of our findings, we're seeing that AutoCAD is still sort of the primary workflows, even though they're clicking on Civil 3D and launching Civil 3D to start the program. A lot of what they do still falls back on legacy AutoCAD-based workflows there, rather than leveraging the tools that have been put into place with Civil 3D as a next level type of application. Data sharing is also a big part of the discussion there with Civil 3D, being able to provide data shortcuts and share data across multiple files to split up the design workload. That's always a big part of our discussion and recommendations. In a lot of cases, we've seen folks who are heavily into Civil 3D. They've been using it for a number of years, but they may have learned from someone in a company or in a previous company that never really used data shortcuts. But what they're doing seems to work, so they just keep going with that. And that's a big area where you could increase the efficiency of drawing files, file size, data management. That's all part of working as efficiently as you can in Civil 3 as a whole. The existing CAD standards, Civil 3 templates and styles, those also play a really big part in how well Civil 3D is being utilized. And in many, many cases, although you're able to get through a project within Civil 3D, your users might be spending a large number of hours making adjustments or adding styles here and there, or editing labels, or going back to previous projects and importing data from one file to another, or finding something that they can remember, oh, I did this in a past project and I need it again here. And so they have to go back and find those and bring those back into their current projects so that they can use them again. Where in the most ideal scenarios, if there are things that are going to benefit project to project as you move along, you'd like to have that consolidated into a template that's standardized and set up for your company, and something that's going to be readily available for anybody that is working on a project moving forward. So taking a look at those things, the user skill sets, the current processes and workflows, and then those supplemental and supporting technical resources. Those are the three big pieces that we try to focus on within a Civil 3D health check service. Next slide, please, Joe. Now, I've talked a lot about what we focus on, and this slide is now going to talk about how we get that accomplished. So how would we go about accomplishing these reviews of workflows and user assessments and templates and so forth? So our Civil 3D health check in particular has a 5-step plan that, again, as Joe mentioned, you were trying to produce actionable results here. So our 5-step plan involves a discussion with designated end users on your side. So you'd identify folks who are very familiar with your current workflows and processes. We'd set up time to speak to them individually or as smaller groups, depending on how comfortable they are there. In a lot of cases, we find that some folks are not as comfortable sharing when they're in groups as opposed to when they are sitting down one-on-one. So if that's the case, we'll set up a designated time for those individuals. Or if there are separate offices or discussions that need to be made between business units, we can set up smaller group discussions and talk to them that way. And these discussions are a very, very unbiased communication where we're really just trying to find out what's going on. It's not a discussion where we're going to try and fix a problem or upfront say, this is not how you're supposed to do things. That's not the intent of a health check. The intent of a health check is to identify what's currently going on and then provide some recommendations on what could potentially make things more efficient or make things more effective. And of course, company to company, there may be specific reasons why you're doing something a certain way. So what we're providing to you is recommendations based on what we've seen, based on what we've heard, and based on what we've done, so that you can decide what's going to be best and most effective for your organization internally. The user assessments are another thing that we try to leverage here for end user resources. So when we're doing user assessments, we have an online Knowledge Smart assessment that we do. It's an online assessment that provides skills-based and task-based questions to the end users, where they'll go on and they'll be asked to answer a number of different questions without the use of help files or without asking their coworkers or looking things up on the internet. So it's a measure of what they're currently able to do and how well they can leverage Civil 3D to do it. And it is Civil 3D based. So one of the bigger things that I've seen in the years that we've been doing health checks is, we have these assessments and we tend to see relatively high scores. And even in the case where it's not a higher score, overall, if you can get a 50% on a Civil 3D assessment that's gauging you on the entire program, that's a pretty good score, because Civil 3D has grown into such a large program itself that it's very, very difficult to understand a little bit about everything. And project to project, if your group or your design division is focused on one particular type of project that you do a lot, you may be very, very strong in those areas and those particular skills, but you may not have used survey or you may not have used parcels, and those parts of the program may not be quite as familiar to you. So you'd score lower on those. But that again, it's not a gauge of whether you can do it or not. It's a gauge to help us identify where those gaps are in the knowledge base, and then provide the best possible training recommendations or educational resources, even if they're online resources, that you can take advantage of to help kind of fill in those gaps. And then finally, we have that template and standards review. So we try to take a look at templates and standards after we've had the workflow and process assessments, primarily because templates and standards are in a design workflow sense of perspective. It's supposed to be there to help start out the project. So if a template is built, a strong template is built, has all of the styles and settings that I need, I can start a project. I'm going to be ready to go as I start to design. The options that I want to choose, the styles that I need to use, they're all going to be readily available there for me. So once we find out what the users are doing, we try to take a look back at the templates and the standards that they have access to see if those templates and standards are providing that good foundational base for supporting those workflows and supporting those processes that they've identified for us. And if there are gaps, or if there are areas where we hear a lot within those workflows of, I have a bunch of styles from previous projects that I'm using, and I always have to import those. Or whenever I start a new drawing, I go back to the previous project that I did, I delete everything and I save it as a new drawing file and I start from there. Those are not the types of things that are promoting efficiency or consistency. From one project to the next could be a little bit different. And efficiency wise, if you're having to go back and import the same things over and over, why not have them there already? So in those types of cases, we would provide recommendations on consolidating styles, or creating updates, or creating additional styles and labels, or even developing a proper best practice based workflow for generating new files and new drawings. All of these bits of information and the data that we collect from those interviews and those assessments and that review of the template is put into a documentation and recommendations presentation. So documentation, recommendations, and the presentation, those kind of roll in together in our Civil 3D health checks, where very similar to Joe's, we have that chart that we can use where we're identifying areas of high priority, areas that are maybe of concern, and then areas that are potentially low concern, or something that could be considered down the line. We also have areas that we found where it's a need to have versus want to have versus might be good to have type of thing. So depending on our discussions with you leading up into the health check services, we can kind of tailor these findings and tailor these recommendations based on the prioritization that you communicate with us along the way. All right, next slide, Joe. The last slide here is just some of the things that we tend to find, so some trends that we've had found in previous health checks, similar to Joe's Revit bad habits. In Civil 3D, very, very similar items are found along the way. And one of the main things that I tend to see is that it's not always just about being able to get the job done or get the project out the door. Efficiency can always be improved. There's always ways to improve efficiency, and it may not even be a noticeable issue up front. We get the job done, it gets out the door, we make some money. But as we talk about the workflows, as we talk about the processes, we can identify some areas where these 10 steps could be 5 steps, or these 15 steps could be an automated button that we click on or develop for you to do along the way. Even something as simple as adding another layout with a title block, that could be automated where you don't have to manually import it all the time, or they can all be pre-built and then you're just selecting the right one that you want as you go along versus trying to find it in it and import it and change it every time you go. We also tend to find out that new tools, things that are being released from version to version. I mentioned how big of a program Civil 3D has kind of evolved into over the years. New tools tend to be where the knowledge gaps are the largest, primarily because if you've been working and your company's been busy, you're tending to focus on exactly what you need to do, and there's not a lot of downtime where you can spend trying to pick up on something new or trying to pick up on an enhancement or a tool that's been released in the last version or two that could potentially be directly impactful to what you're doing. So being able to identify those new tools or having a plan so that those tools can be sort of exposed to the end users. That's something that we tend to find quite a bit in health checks as well. And then the Civil 3D and AutoCAD are not the same program. I mentioned this a little bit before, and I just wanted to reiterate that again. And that's something that we tend to see more in the user assessments than anything else. So with user assessments, I talked about scores. I talked about how it's not necessarily a pass or fail type of thing, but it's really a way to identify a knowledge gap within that application. And we have actually seen scores that come in very, very high in a user assessment, but the time that it takes the user to get to that score is somewhat outrageous. It could be when we're working with Civil 3D, if we are leveraging the tools, leveraging the features and the functions that are there, we should be able to get an answer fairly quickly, or we should be able to complete that assessment in an hour to 2 hours. I've seen a very, very high score that took someone 4 hours. And when we took a little bit of a deeper dive into that and talked to the managers during the presentations, we found out exactly what they had expected, which was people were using Civil 3D, but they were doing everything manually, like they were working in AutoCAD. So rather than leveraging the tools that are there to create the proper design objects in Civil 3D, they were drawing everything out with lines and circles and arcs and putting in text and leaders versus using the labeling tools. So although they were getting the job done, they were able to produce everything that would get them to a constructible project. They were not taking advantage of the tools that were inside of Civil 3D to create those drawings and produce those designs as efficiently as possible. So being able to identify that gap and then provide the training and educational resources to say, I understand that you've been doing it this way and you're still getting the job done, but it could be easier, or it could be faster, or it could be more efficient if we just got you the training that you needed to be able to use the tools that are there for you. That's one of the bigger things that we tend to find within those user assessments. We also find out that data sharing is very, very underutilized. We hear a lot about files that are all contained within one particular drawing file versus being split up with data shortcuts or even external references in some cases. Or we find out that a lot of things are being copied from one file to another rather than shared. So although they are splitting files up across multiple drawings, they're actually creating copies of things instead of linking them all back into one. And that tends to increase the chances of conflicts in design or conflicts in the data that's being shared there. Because if something is being copied from one file to another, if one of them changes or gets updated, you'll have to remember to update everything else. Versus if it's a data share with the XREF or data shortcut, synchronization tools are available that can synchronize all of the designs across the board because they're linked back to the same original data source. So that's always something that comes up in discussions as well. And then finally, finding reliable resources. Whenever we're looking for resources, not only on the training side of things, but just questions from day to day and project to project or within particular designs, we tend to see that users rely heavily upon their coworkers, which although it's a very, very nice thing to know that people are working together, it's not necessarily the best use of everyone's time if you are there sitting at your desk trying to do your design while you're having to field questions from your coworkers all day long. So finding those reliable resources outside of the ones that are sitting next to you in a cubicle or sitting across the internet through a Teams chat window, having a reliable online data source that's not the internet where anyone can post anything that they want about how to do it in Civil 3D, having the best training resources, having the best online searching tools, even things like an online learning environment. Those types of recommendations and those types of setups can also be included in our Civil 3D health check recommendations. So reliability of resources, data sharing, being able to leverage the tools that are within Civil 3D ready for you to use, and then finding areas that are going to promote efficiency and increase productivity. Those are the highlights of what we typically find within our Civil 3D health checks. Thanks, Joe. I think that wraps up my 3 slides here for us.
Well then, thank you, Matt. and we move from software on the desktop to software in the cloud. It changes things a bit. We're not necessarily, not likely, evaluating individual files now. We're looking at saying, how are you using a platform? And when we're talking about cloud, and Autodesk Cloud in particular, we're really focused in on these three aspects of it. Autodesk Docs, BIM Collaborate Pro, whether it's Civil 3D, Plant 3D, or Revit that you're using with it, and then Autodesk Build. So those, from an IMAGINiT's side, when we're talking about health checks, those are the places where we've seen the heaviest adoption of the use of software. So that's where we focused our health check activities. And when we're looking at those, in particular Docs and ABC Pro, the mindset that we have going into it more often than not is starting with how did you get into using this software to begin with? Because most people started using Docs or ABC Pro because COVID came around. Everybody, like overnight, had to start working remote, and especially on the Revit side. So that's my background. That's what my head goes to. Some people went to remote desktop solutions. Other people tried VPNs and were really unhappy with it. And then we had ABC Pro. It was made available to people at no charge for a while during that time, as Autodesk was looking to help people get through some of these transitions. But we just like, hey, here's a quick way I can better collaborate and work on Revit files from home. It's in the cloud, cool, and then stopped. And if we look at what features of BIM Collaborate Pro, of ACC, of Docs, however you want to talk about it, most people are still at some sort of minimal use of that software. They're using it for a better file open process for Revit, a better version of Dropbox for DWG files. And they're not really taking it to the full advantage of what's out there, what's capable. Whether we're talking about Docs, Build, ABC Pro, we've got all sorts of extra things. Being able to check out and understand the history, doing version comparison between files, markups, issues, checklists, meeting notes. The list goes on and on and on, depending on which version of that cloud stuff you're looking at. But we need to take a look and say, what is the specific software that you're using, and what are you using for it? So the evaluation side for what we have going on for a ACC, BIM Collaborate Pro, Docs type of health check goes a bit faster, because it's pretty quick. You can come out to us and say, well, we use BIM Collaborate Pro for feature 1, 2, and 3. And we can turn around and say, okay, well, you've got feature 1, 2, and 3. How are you doing markups, for example, or something else that's possible? And it may be you've got a different preferred tool for doing that type of feature. It may be, I was in a conversation earlier this week with a customer. We were talking about software, and it's like, oh yeah, I forgot it did that. And oh yeah, you know what? That's a good point. I didn't remember that, this feature was available inside the software, and I'm glad you brought that up. We need to look back into that again. Can we set up another meeting, another appointment, in this case, another mentoring session to go through and work through relearning some of those things that kind of sort of knew were there, and in some cases just flat out didn't realize that. This goes back to that same thing of saying, you're already paying for the software. How can you make sure that you're getting absolutely everything you can from it? And beyond that, are there any possibilities that you've got for consolidation? I was just in a conference meeting, earlier today, where it was from a facility side of things, but one of the trends that's out there on the facility side, and I would argue is everywhere, is where can we consolidate and streamline our technology stack? Where are there places where we've got multiple pieces of software that do the same thing? In some cases, it will be absolutely valid and defendable because software X just flat out does it better than software Y. Okay, great. There's going to be other places, though, where software X just does it different from software Y. And we really ought to see is like, do you really need to be paying for two? In some cases, we work with customers that'll say, you know what, this project manager really wants that software, and I'm not going to stop them from using it. In other companies, we'll be working with them, say, yeah, that project manager uses that other software, but we have a larger company financial bottom line to worry about. So we're going to be encouraging, forcing, whatever, a change so that we can consolidate our software and just pay for the things we need and don't have that unnecessary duplication. Are there places where, as it says, there's still a manual process going on that needs to be digitized? And that goes with using cloud software. It goes with anything. You know, the regular health checks that we had too. Are you still pulling in Excel spreadsheets into Revit that don't need to be done that way, or wherever it goes? Are we going to find out as we're looking at this that there's other processes that you have, just workflows within your company that have the potential to be automated, to take the human portion of it out entirely? Whether it's Imagine Utilities for Revit, I mentioned the spreadsheet, maybe it's just a thing where we can take a schedule, export the data to Excel, edit the data in Excel, and import the data back in. We're not pasting the spreadsheet into Revit. We're just using a utility that's available to every IMAGINiT customer at no charge to do that Excel push and pull. There's dozens and dozens and dozens of different things that we've got in Utilities for Revit, and that's free. So not everything we're talking about here is going to be something that's going to have a cost involved with it. Just leverage the tools that you've got out there and make it work. So in a cloud environment, we're really looking at the platform, not individual files. There's some level of employee knowledge validation, just as we had with Civil 3D and mentioned with Revit across any health check that we'll be doing. There's a level of consistency there. But the vision is cast a little bit wider here and focuses more on features and functions as opposed to the output of those features and functions, if that hopefully makes a little bit of sense. When we look at all of that, the latest version of the health checks that we have with the Autodesk Cloud software, the ones that are established, tried and true, Civil 3, Revit, Plant 3D, whatever, gets to where do we go from here? You understand that we've got all those things. What now? Well, hopefully there's some level of information that we've delivered through here, either myself or Matt, that has got you thinking, and there might be, hopefully, some things that you can enact on your own tomorrow. You did a little screen cap of something, or you jotted down a note from what we were saying of, you know what, that's something that we have a problem with. I now have an idea of how to check for that, or a process that we might put into place to help account for that and mitigate that issue. So first step is, what can you grab and what can you do today on your own? The other part is, how can you leverage us? How can you leverage IMAGINiT as we're going through all of this? Because we've got a deep bench. If we're looking at things, whether it's civil infrastructure, mapping, reality capture, laser scanning, architecture, engineering, construction, software development, product lifecycle management, manufacturing, facilities management, there's a whole host of things that we do. And we've got a deep bench of people throughout the US and Canada to be able to work with you on what you're seeing, and to be able to grab the context and the environments that we see every day in different firms across North America, and take that context and knowledge to benefit you, to be able to see, here are what some of those best practices are, but beyond that, what are some of the, maybe not a best practice as an industry goes, but something we're seeing that is really good and great for your particular application, because we've seen somebody similar. Places where it might be a multidiscipline firm where we've got to look at interactions between the software packages more intensely than we might in other places. We've got the people for that. So I would say, leverage the depth and breadth of who we are and what we do, and the the knowledge and experience that we'll bring into it to your benefit, whether it's in the Autodesk world, if we're going to facilities management with that Aptura line of products, going in and messing with, we need to go to finite element analysis and do something through there. Comes any number of places. There's businesses that we work with, customers that we have, and maybe not direct, but sometimes adjacent knowledge that can come in and put two and two together and make it happen. If we look at it from the cloud perspective, just that one in particular, there's all sorts of different folks that we have just on that team alone. So if you're looking at something from a cloud perspective, this is one example. I'm not going to go through every team. I'm not going to say this is who we've got on Civil, this is who we've got on Revit, this is who. But as an example, just with the team that we've got that's focused on construction, as you see, they're over 150 years of experience, over 200 different implementations and training classes that we've done on the Autodesk Cloud products. If we've done it that much, what can you gain from the breadth and depth of knowledge and experience that we can bring to your benefit? So the action items coming out of this is you've got something that you could take away, hopefully, in what we've talked about and put into action right now, but then do contact us. I mean, that's what we're here for, is to work with our customers and be that last missing puzzle piece. I've had that picture on the left-hand side in presentations for, 15 years, I feel, maybe more, because it still fits, no pun intended, where that's our purpose in life, is you've got a lot of things. You've got different parts of that path, that bridge, the road you're traveling, but there's just one thing that you could be better. Let us be that missing piece of the puzzle, bridge the gap between you and success. And just my request is don't do it alone. Even if you take the things here and it's like, yeah, that's great, but I'm not going to call IMAGINiT, whatever. Don't do it alone. Grab somebody else in your company, grab a colleague from another company, do whatever you've got to do. I would certainly prefer that you reach out to us. That's, a selfish request, but don't go it alone. There's plenty of opportunities for you to work with others. We don't need to work in isolation. Even if we're just meeting virtually with each other and not around a meeting table like you see here, we're social creatures. Let's do it socially. So with that,
Thanks, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.